Should you be listening to an environmentalist? As an environmentalist myself, I would say yes, absolutely listen to me and everything I say. But seriously, this is a question to ask because depending on where you are and who you are, that question might not have the same answer. Environmentalists are viewed as people who fight for advocacy of the indigenous people who are concerned about the future of the planet, people who are just pests and immature. There are various degrees of differences, I would say, in the opinions that people have when it comes to environmentalists and what they do. But if you look at just the definition of it, that's basically just someone who's concerned about the environment or advocates for it. And it's not a professional term, it's not even a qualifying term. Anyone can be an environmentalist. If you're an Indian who does not like garbage around their house or on the streets, you're an environmentalist. You care about your environment. It does take a lot of forms, but it's very easy to be an environmentalist. But you can't say that you'll always be loved by people, and you'll see that with very prominent people because environmentalists are never advocating for any politics. They're always advocating for some principles, for the collective good. And it's a level of empathy, a level of advocacy that goes beyond race, religion, gender, politics, countries. It's very much a human, and sometimes even, I would say, it goes past even humanity and even advocates for animals and creatures that are not human. So when you're advocating for something that grand, it becomes almost inevitable that when these ideals and these advocacies come head to head with politics that tell you to only apply your principles to this set of people or try to find justifications for that set of people over others, it's going to get in the way. Okay, the profits of a few private corporations, the profits or benefit of a race of people, national interests of one over the other, these things are far too petty than what environmental advocacy goes for. And so if you have environmental advocacy, it will clash with one set of politics or another. It's only a matter of time. An example of that is Greta Thunberg. She many years ago got famous for being a Swedish girl who refused to go to school, but instead went and protested in front of the parliament. I believe the Swedish parliament for her. And she basically had a point. Hey, you're going to ruin the future. Why am I supposed to sit in school when I won't have a future to, study and prosper into? You've ruined the planet, you're ruining society, you're ruining the world today. And the people who will inherit it tomorrow don't really have anything to look forward to. So you should stop ruining it for everyone. We should not let climate change come to pass. And I'll be honest, I was one of those people who really did not, I would say, pay attention to it because I saw a lot of environmental activists and advocates who had suffered and protested for much more important, much more specific issues a lot longer. And what I had seen was basically they would go on weeks of hunger strikes and nothing would happen because, it really doesn't work that way, that if you just sit in a corner, don't eat, anyone will actually care for you, when their whole plan to begin with was to not care for you, right? But of course, people have their ideals, they work and stand by them. I can at least respect that. But I was very surprised that this Swedish girl who really does not have much on the line is getting so much attention, so much coverage, whereas people who are on the front lines fighting with their lives, many people in South America, in countries like Brazil, have died. They no longer exist, fighting the same fight, sometimes even for a much smaller scale, but they could not survive it. And they get no headlines, they get no memorials, they do not get even a fraction of the attention that Greta Thunberg did. So back then I dismissed her.
How dare you!
But over time, I would say I've come to respect her. She has really evolved into an environmentalist. This was not just something she did for a summer. She has continued to go through with her advocacy, with her using the fame she has, the attention she got, to try to support more environmental causes, conservation, environmental cleanups, things like that. So she's really put herself to use, and I honestly cannot complain. She's done now at this point, I would say, more than I have. So how can I be critical of her? But what has been interesting is seeing this narration turn. She could go into a country, tell people that, hey, we should protest, we should show up and show our politicians that our voice matters. So she came to Canada, Vancouver, she did a little protest, and the whole idea was to let the, I would say, elected officials know that the voting base, the young people, are there. They are united on this issue and they care about the issue of climate change, so that in the future, if they want their votes, they can use that as an issue. It's more of a show of strength. And even though back then I saw a lot of people being like, hey, why was I 4 hours late home because just some Swedish girl decided to block all our roads? I get it, I get the pain as well. But now she does not have the same pull. She does not have the same reputation. She does not get the same fame. She is getting more and more criticized because now her advocacy has turned to the current conflict in the Middle East between the Pali boys and the Easy boys, and of course she is advocating for humanitarianism. It's not really surprising that a girl who cares about people, who cares about humanity, who is empathetic to even people who will come after her. She wants them to have a good world. She does not want them to be left with the waste of a world based on the selfish decisions of their ancestors. Even something as, I would say, ideological, something that hasn't completely manifested. If she can empathize and she can stand on principle for that, of course she would look at a genocide and the happening and not be concerned by it. But she didn't just do that. She grew a spine. She put herself on a boat with the humanitarian aid and went in. Now, of course, international waters, she got abducted. Typically, if this was any other country, they would be at war with it. But of course, when you vote for a country to not be allowed to be a state, then you can basically declare them unofficial or basically illegitimate and do whatever you want. So off she went into a plane, flown back off, and then she did it again. She's back on a boat, heading into it, gets caught, gets tortured, gets thrown off. The point is basically not that, what she did is right or wrong. It's very obvious, humanitarian aid for people suffering from genocide or even apartheid, I would say, which was the status quo before this whole conflict started. Yeah, that's not a wrong thing. That's very obviously the right thing to do. I wish more of the world had the spine and the means to do it, but of course, this is all we got. So I have a lot of respect for her, but she has basically been dropped. No longer does she get the favorable coverages. There's no political party, there's no politician, there's no media outlet that will touch her anymore. All because she stood by her principles rather than the politics. And this standing on principle rather than politics is something environmentalists will do all throughout their career, because that is essentially what environmentalism comes down to. It's a principle, it's a value rather than a set of politics that can be applied for an election cycle. So when I tell you about the second case, you will see a similar thing play out. I'm talking about Sonam Wangchuk. Now this man is from Ladakh in India, and for, I would say, up to a few years ago, he was very, very well respected, to the point that his story became the inspiration for one of the biggest movies in India. It's a coming-of-age story of how a man thinks outside the box to really question the education system, which is really molding young minds into machines that can offer no creative value to society and cause a lot of suffering for everyone, including, and most importantly, to the students themselves, right? It's a great story, a timeless classic from Bollywood, but this man does not get the same graces right now, because right now he's in prison. And the story is very similar. Back then, when he was, not stepping on any politician's toes, he was great. But of course, he's concerned about the effects of climate change on Ladakh and, the societal issues that happen in Ladakh. And after 2019, once it was declared a union territory, basically the central government of the country is now responsible for those people. He's been advocating for those people to have their voice heard in a democratic value. He wants representation for the place, and there's a big whole political movement on it. I'm not going to dive into it, but he basically is advocating for those people to have their own voice and be part of the economic progress, along with a lot of other things. Now, his environmentalism is something he had been doing for the last few years anyways. I would occasionally come across a video or two on YouTube from him. It was great, but now that he has started to stake one side for having the Ladakhi people have a political voice, that became an issue. Because it turns out, last month, there was political violence in Ladakh. And most importantly, they burned down the office of the ruling party of the country, the central Modi government, BJP. Their office was set on fire. And that seems to have really, the central government has gone after him and just made him a scapegoat. Because when that happened, he was on a hunger strike. Personally, I think it's a useless way of protesting, but it's also, I would say, one of those, selfless ways of protesting. You go on a hunger strike, or self-immolation, some people do, as a form of protest. They basically burn themselves to death in protest. I personally don't think it's a valid form of protest, but for people who really believe in peace, this is what they do. They, rather than inflict suffering on the others, they inflict suffering on themselves, and they ask for compassion. Again, to me, it doesn't make a lot of sense, so I won't try to justify or explain how this works, but that's essentially what he was doing. He was on a hunger strike, but as soon as the violence broke out, he was nabbed, put into prison. Still, no explanation, nothing really against him, but he is now being called a terrorist. And there are two justifications being given for it. One is that, hey, separatists or people outside the country who want to basically harm the country, they show his videos and say, look, the people in India are suffering under this government. As we say, the Indian government is not good, right? So that's what they say. And so they use his example, his advocacy, to say, hey, see, people in India are unhappy. And the second is basically he made a speech, and which is said to have incited the violence. I will let you listen to it yourself.
Nepal la yung stewdo, Bangladesh la yung stewdo, Sri Lanka yung stewdo, miwan se gyurja kyong anok tene, chik chik shina tene kyong anok samara reale. Nyer dewate ochuat agun choksla te healings nam danang doanang te choks manpa Ladakh senanga ma jive gyurja yung jive phogyu peaceful revolution kabena ngatang sama rang tokriya dukste shin chiktang tene gyurja mikyong kametchen Tebo cat boyoin, young Yulgun Nam Sangma. Young Yulgun Piang Ladakh Nespecic Goin, Niza Metuk goes Metyak, Niza Tubareka Shigos Metyak, Toria Shin, Jean Nakstanin, Janma Miltan Zerkango. Sompa Ote to Spolepten,
Nothing. Right? Of course, there's nothing in there to incite violence, but he really is advocating for the people. And I think this is another place where you see the same values, these people with the same principles, environmentalists, just advocating for people, advocating for the masses, not their own personal benefit, for everyone, for the public. Something basically the politicians should do, but I guess we're in an era where politicians are selfish and the advocates and environmentalists have to now speak for the common good. Now, his narrative does not shine with the central government, and I get it, all right? Ladakh is a border state. We have territorial issues with China over there, so I get if the central government does not want it to be under regional control, where regional politics and regional parties can then have their own separatist movements and sow chaos. It has happened before in India, I get it, but silencing the people is only going to turn them more away from you. They will only feel more unheard, and they will only seek more of those polarizing and outside voices. They should be heard by their own representatives, by their own people. If you make it a union territory, of course you've said you will represent them. It's very obvious, I would say. But I'm not here to comment on how the Indian government just, stabbed itself in its own foot. I want to talk about how Sonam Wangchuk, a man who was well respected, an environmentalist, an advocate for his own people, is now being held in custody for basically things he never said, for excuse. These are accusations the government has just thrown at him, and just tell them now. He is not a free person for weeks now. There's no evidence behind him, behind any of what they've done. They basically, an incident happened, the next day they nabbed him and held him responsible, tried to make everything go hush. I'm not asking you to go and advocate in his place. I'm not asking you to join Greta Thunberg on a boat and try to get humanitarian aid to people who are starving to death. No. I'm asking you to see environmentalists for what they speak. It's very easy for politicians, for industries to vilify environmentalists. Sometimes they're talking about pollinators, and the industry will come and tell a farmer, hey, he hates that you make money. But why? What does the environmentalist, someone who's concerned for the common good, get from harming anybody? Nobody. All right? These environmentalists, he or she, are people who are advocating for the betterment of society. Sometimes an industry, a particular profession might not benefit from it, but we have to think with the greater good in context. We have to think about everyone else. Sometimes it might hurt you to not log and get those big dense trees from this part of the forest, but you've already used up the rest of the island, so let it be. Sometimes those profits are not worth what the entire island will lose in terms of its ecological heritage. Sometimes that is also what matters to society, and it is not wrong. And environmentalists, I would say, should only be judged for their advocacy, for what they're talking about. Now, I'm not going to say you shouldn't be selfish, you should hurt yourself for everyone else's good. Of course not. How is that everyone's good if you are the one suffering, right? It has to be collective benefit. It's not a radical movement. It's not something that has to have winners and losers. It's supposed to reduce suffering. All right, so in the future, my takeaway is that if you are talking about environmentalists, if you're judging environmentalists, listen to what they're saying. All right, don't go to someone like Fox News, don't go to what your official politician is telling you, what the industry spokesperson is telling you. Environmentalists always try to get their voice out, so listen to what they're saying. And then you can even talk to them, or basically think for yourself. Is what they're doing right? Is their advocacy correct? Or is their method correct? Is it adequate or not? I don't know. I really respect both of the people I discussed today for what they have done. Even if I personally think their methods are ineffective, won't do anything. Maybe I'm pessimistic or pragmatic. That is an entirely different question, and I think even you would have your own opinion on this. But when we talk about these issues, I would implore anyone to see environmentalists, see human rights activists, see people who advocate for others, who are talking about empathy. When these people come into picture, listen to them. Do not look at the profit loss statements that politicians and private individuals with their own private interests make for these people. And that's about it. I have nothing more to say. Monsoon has come to an end, so it's time for me to go and make videos for the main channel. So I'll see you there in a couple of weeks.